I have a question on this.
No, she didn't.
All right, everybody go to page 80?
Yeah. Page what?
Now, page 80, please.
Page 80, question 12, and the answer to 12.
It's talking about something that you'll never be. The designated sales associate. Number one, it has to be a commercial deal. Number two, they have to have assets in excess of $1 million.
So that's why I didn't understand.
Yeah, because it doesn't fit anything that we talked about.
Okay.
Because now you've got single agency. Because one of the associates is going to represent the buyer and the other is going to represent the seller. In my mind, that's not going to happen. Commercial world, non-resident, I really shouldn't, commercial is not really the right word. It's non-residential because warehouses and all that other stuff still fall under commercial. So you have to understand that, you know, when you use the word commercial, are you talking about a commercial building? Warehouse?
And that 13, which is the one that follows it, is also equally confusing, possibly for the same reason.
Which relationship is a general agency? Now, we know it's not transaction broker, and we know it's not single agency. We know it's not designated. Why? Page 80, question 13. How do we know that it's not single agency? Oh, I'm sorry. How do we know it's not transaction broker?
Because it's agency.
Because of the word agency, which means it also would not be non-brokerage relationship. So let's see how many answers that knocks out. A brokerage company employed under a listing contract. Maybe. The second one says relationship between employee broker and broker associates. Yes. Sales associate working with a prospecting buyer. Not necessarily. Relationship between the sales associate and the seller who has listed property with the brokerage. Maybe. The only one that is definitely general agency is the relationship between you and the broker. You have a fiduciary relationship. That's why taking a copy of your listings with you when you leave the company would be a violation of your fiduciary duties unless you had the broker's permission.
Right.
To take the originals would be larceny.
Thank you.
So I think what we have to be conscious of here is when we talk about single agency, transaction broker, and no brokerage relationship, that's the broker's relationship with the public. When you talk about the relationship between you and Ben, or you and the company, that is an agency, general agency. And the minute the word agency hits, you know there's fiduciary. But really the key word wasn't agency. What was the key word? General. Because it could have said single agency. That would screw up all the answers, but it could have said single agency. But that's probably why it didn't. Okay? For those of you who just came in, we're just taking a few minutes to answer some questions. And the comment I made is, if you're taking these quizzes, which you darn well better be, and you're not understanding why you got an answer right or wrong, make a note of it, and then next class we'll do what we're doing now. All right, anybody have any other? It could be anything, but I want to make sure we're including the quiz. Very good. I got plenty to do. Okay, we're off to the races. Page 126, if you will, please. Please make sure that you sign the attendance. Who can penalize you? Frank is one. DBeeper is another. Especially for you at the moment, because you're not licensed yet. The only thing FREC can do to you right now is deny you the right to take the state exam. Once you have a license, a whole lot of other shit comes up. Okay, so I've got administrative penalties, either from the commission, more likely, or the department. What other types of penalties are there? Judicial is the wrong word, but you're in the right direction. Criminal and civil. Misdemeanors, felonies. And we know misdemeanors is in jail for up to a year if it's a first degree misdemeanor. For non-licensed people, it's up to 5 years and $5,000. That is a relatively new part of the statute. Now, that penalizing people without a license because they're practicing real estate is not done by FREC.
That's the department.
Because unless you're an applicant or a licensee, 475 gives them no authority. So that was the problem in the past. People were getting away with practicing real estate without a license because it was kind of like a gap in the law there. Well, they closed the gap. No, the department. If it's criminal, depending on what it is, the FREC or the department may refer them to the state attorney's office. So it depends on what it is. The point being is there's 3 basic categories of potential penalties for violating 475, which means you face double jeopardy. FREC can nail your little fanny to the wall and so can the courts. Generally speaking, in law, you can't be tried for the same thing twice, but you're not part of the general public anymore. You're a licensed professional. You're held to a higher standard. And some of the things I've heard here would probably get you in front of FREC, the department, or the courts. That's what I'm trying to avoid. Because you know what? Sometimes what you think you should be able to do makes sense. Until you see that it says what? You can't. And it makes no sense. That drove me nuts. Because at points in time, that's why I use the mother thing. Because mom doesn't have to make sense. Mom will knock your family on the floor. If you don't like her rules, go live somewhere else. Well, that's kind of FREC. So it's not always, and I've said this to you before, but I'm bringing it up again because we're about to leave the law part of this thing, go into other areas of law, but we're past basically 475. All right, bottom of 126. At the very bottom of the page, Lines 1 through 8. Bracket star. But how you like that? First note, you get a star. Everybody has it. How many of you have counted the pages in the book and realized that we'll never get through at the pace we're going? Anybody that did that, I told you not to. That's why we won't get to the end. OEE of little faith, lack of confidence. And this is my show. So I'll get there when I'm ready. I said a few minutes ago that the commission issues the administrative. One of the administrative one is that you get a notice back after you've sent your application that says what? You have been denied. On the next page, you'll see there are two categories of reasons why you may be rejected or denied. Looking at the first list, would that list be a reason why you wouldn't get a license? Or is that more or less saying if you haven't completed those things, you won't get a license? In other words, those are not reasons why you'll never get a license, unless of course you can't pass the test. You can't take the test 800 times and never pass it, yes, that does not go, will kick in. Which tells me the next list is not going to be a nice list. It's all things that you might do wrong.
So they give you a chance to review those zero?
Yes, you have to pay, I don't know how much it is, I don't remember now, but you can schedule a time to go review your exam, well, not the application, but you can review your exam after you fail it. I had somebody one time wanted to look at the exam after they passed, because they got a 96 and they felt they should have had 100. Like in my mind, I don't give a shit. But I don't. To this day, I don't know what scores I got on the state exam for either sales or my instructor one. All I know is I was, and that's all I really care about.
That was in the formula.
Somebody found it. Yes.
Okay, I can read the word application. It says, maybe to answer your question in the application.
Where are you? What line are you on?
Second. No, not number 6.
Neglecting to forward the proper fees. Well, yeah, if you don't give them the money, if you're supposed to give them to apply, you'll be denied to be paid them. No, that was $80-some, $100.
I don't
That's what they were talking about.
Who decides if you have what it takes to be a competitive, a good realtor? Because it says in there,
Well, number
the
one,
number says the character.
FREC doesn't determine if you're a realtor.
Okay,
FREC determines whether you're qualified to have a license.
okay, but did not possess the character required by the provisions of the Florida statutes of 455 and 475. Who is
Okay.
the one that decides if you possess those or not?
If you've committed moral turpitude, you've committed
Well, it
crime.
starts with the people that review the application. if they feel the application indicates that there's an issue, you're gonna be notified.
Okay.
And most likely, it's gonna have, it's like the story I told you about, one of the students I had, where on prom night, they went out and fed the alligators.
Yeah.
And that's a felony. It took her 4 months of documentation and answering questions to finally get approved. That's why you have to make sure you tell the truth and nothing but the truth on that application, because they're gonna find out. Why are they gonna find out? You did your fingerprints. That kind of, you know, you're gonna get somebody else's fingerprints. It's their job to determine if, number one, you possess the character to be allowed to deal with the public. Number two,
What is that definition of character? What is that?
that you put the public first, like any other professional. You know your business. You tell people the way it is. You go that extra mile. You don't have a rap sheet 6 miles long. You don't have 18 DUIs.
Or armed robbery, or home invasion.
Yeah. And some other things that I won't. What is the typical reason that you would be rejecting any professional license? At the bottom of the page, lines 21 through 28, that actually finishes up on the top of the next page.
127?
Bottom of 127, line 21, where it says violations and administrative penalties. Bracket, and then there's 2 lines on the next page. In the gray box, you have a list of administrative penalties. Now, do these penalties, well, who would apply these penalties?
FREC?
Right, is right. DBPR. Anybody else? How about the courts?
On the court, yeah.
No, because courts are not administrative. Courts are civil or criminal. So if you're asked, can a licensee be imprisoned for violating 475, the answer is
No.
yes.
Oh, yeah.
If they ask you, can FREC or the department imprison a licensee for violating 475 or 455, the answer is
No.
no. Gotta remember, there's 2 categories of penalties. Criminal and civil, courts. That's easy to remember because they all start with F. I mean, C. I wish you paid as much attention when I'm fooling around as I do when I'm trying to be serious. You get hundreds. Now, what's about to happen now in the next part of the chapter, starting below that chart, is they're basically taking you from minor violations and penalties to death.
Oops.
Called revocation, I'm sorry. Same difference. The first one is called a letter of reprimand. Now, without looking, does everybody know what the word reprimand means? You are a bad little boy, you're a bad little girl, don't do it again. Well, there are times when somebody, what they did wasn't really illegal, but it was very unethical. Well, they can't penalize you for being unethical. The Realtor Association can potentially kick you out of the association for that reason.
Do you have an example of that? What would
What?
be an example
Of what?
of something ethical that,
You charge somebody
Unethical?
15% when you only had to charge you 6 and they were okay with it without the knowing.
I don't know, because it's not
And
the other person
ethical
accepted it.
means that if you
Yeah,
don't
but-
conduct, it's more of how you conduct yourself
Hold that information.
and how you treat them
okay.
is more what ethical is. I mean, think about what it means to be ethical.
Right.
Applies to anything. Again, remember, I'm dealing with the public.
Like for
So
example,
all this is not about me.
I ride drunk or something like that.
That
Showing up, showing
is rolling towards criminal.
I had a realtor that was always drinking wine. No joke.
Now,
No joke.
that, you're right,
Yeah.
because they are putting the public in danger.
Yeah, that's a big no-no.
If you'll notice on 128, line 3 through 7, they talk about that letter of,
No, yeah, we already did that.
I know we've already done it. Hey.
But I don't know.
Probable cause panel would normally be the source of the reprimand. Because the probable cause panel may not feel there is probable cause, but they don't like the way the agent handled the situation. That they could have handled it in a more professional way. So they will put together a letter, probably by one of the attorneys for the department or the division. And that would be sent to the licensee. Yeah. In the past, all violations of 475 applied to anything you could do wrong. They realized there were certain aspects of the law where it was really minor and a big suspension or revocation or anything of that nature really wasn't necessary. Like you not displaying the fair housing poster. So we need to just tell you, get the poster up. You have 15 days. That would be an example of what? Notice of non-compliance. So anything you're doing of that nature that is not in compliance with the law, first thing they're going to do is warn you and give you, I think it's 15 days it says there, to correct it.
Does that include like a cease and desist?
No, it's not that deep.
Severe, okay.
Do these non-compliances or reprimand letters affect in the future if you want to become a broker or something like that? Do they have a
It depends on what you do from the point in time that happened until you go to apply. But it's the same thing when people are denied because of what they did in the past. So it'd be kind of the same thing. But it's probably not, unless you've done something since then, they've already basically forgiven you the past. So from the time you got your sales associate's license until you go to try to get your broker's license, apply for it, if you've been good there, no problem. But the problem's gonna come in here, not what's in the past. But the past may fuel what happens now. Because you did X, and now, since we've given you a license, you've done X 3 times. And you're asking us to let you become a broker. Maybe we should let you become broker. We get to the R. If you want to know what violations fall under non-compliance, it tells you in the first paragraph of that. It's 61J-24.003. Those are the rules of the commission. And I showed you how to get to them. The paragraph that talks about the 15 days, which is lines 15 through 17, start.
I have a general question. My biggest issue is figuring out how many days, how many weeks for each of those many, and there seems to be no rhyme or reason. Is there a magic Dakota ring carrier?
Nope.
Okay. Maybe I'm just the only one.
No, what are you not? You're the only one's got the guts to ask.
Yes. You are correct.
Well, let's see. Think about it. If it has to do with appealing, it's probably going to be 15 or 30. Right off the bat. Think about it as the night goes on.
We got a couple of weeks yet. You can come up with the next.
Okay, thanks.
No pressure.
Yeah, thank you. It's so.
We'll get
And I assume you want me to
Try to
do that with no
memorize
extra
60
charge?
days, 30 days.
Okay,
If you charge us, I think I would go to FREC.
you would.
Oh, wow.
My aunt's a
Well,
lawyer.
what should we do since we give it to you for free?
I don't know.
Well, it's not really free. There's, nothing's ever what?
Great.
Free.
I didn't even think it's on point.
Are we being recorded now?
Yes. Ask me if I care. Finally got to the point where I realized that I know enough now not to bury myself. I might, get smacked, but I'm not going to get knocked out. So now, reprimand. Now you're not doing things you should be doing that are really more administrative in nature. That's when the notice of non-compliance comes into play. So that might hit the broker more likely than you. Now, let's say that you ignore them and you don't do what they said to make yourself in compliance. Then it moves to the next category, which is citation. It's lines 18 through 24.
Bracket, highlight.
Bracket, no star. Now, the next page and the page after it are a list of citations. Effective as of 2012, so there may be some more.
You have to learn all the things.
Yep,
No.
yep,
For the exam?
yeah,
I've memorized that.
yep.
It's like memorizing the 50 presidents.
Oh, well, you know what? My granddaughters learned the states by singing a song alphabetically. It was wild to watch them do it. And she did, they just rattled right through it. I started trying to do it, I get lost after the P's. Not because they aren't any P's. That's interesting, the neat way of teaching them states. They won't ever realize they're learning the states. They just, it's the melody in the song that really gets them going.
I guess.
But whatever.
Like you'll remember it forever.
Yep.
The letter out of your head.
Exactly.
I know what the presidents and the lawyers deserve.
Really?
That's why I do some of the stupid things I do. Because I found over the years that 20 years from now, 30 years from now. I told you about Bob Solomon. I had him now 35 years ago. And I used to use a phrase when we talked about can you receive compensation if you don't have a license? And my phrase was always not even a candy bar. When I walked into the office the first time when Ben was taking me around to introduce me to everybody when I joined the company, Bob said, Bill, and no idea who he was. In the years I've done this, the number of people, my favorite is somebody will come along and say he was in the class in the late 80s, early 90s, and they start describing this person in the class. But I finally learned that if I didn't acknowledge, they just keep trying to explain who the person was, and the more they explained, the less likely it was I was to figure it out. Now, no, you don't have to memorize all this. But I think it's important from the standpoint of questions to realize the type of things that would be considered a citation versus a notice of noncompliance. Also includes things that a school may or may not do.
When do these books have an online one?
Have a what?
Like a web feed?
No. Well, yes, they do if you sign up for an online course.
Because I saw in the book a little at sign. Like you couldn't have this book on the internet.
Yes, you can. You can go where I showed you to go, into the Division of Real Estate, where it says statutes and rules. If you go in there, you can call 475, 475 opens up, and you can download it.
Alright.
Which is not necessarily a bad idea. Now, downloading it doesn't mean printing it. Downloading means putting it into your iPad or into your computer.
Dale, is there a question bank online for practice questions?
No, that would be against the law. You know that the
for the
questions on the
class.
state exam are confidential.
I got an offer today in a postcard by,
Yeah, me too.
everybody phone calls.
I got a text telling me that you're interested in being a realtor now.
How would you prefer not to have to pay more than $50 and get the same question?
No joke. No
They say
joke.
it's free, but I didn't do
It's
it.
no joke.
So I got a text.
I got a call from online.
Well, if this person is putting questions like the ones on the state exam out to the public, that's a violation of law. Questions are confidential.
Look, no joke.
I have people, I always tell people to come back and tell me about things that maybe we didn't talk about.
That's what I was.
Let's say I'm sure.
Dale,
Or here, Wycliffe Country Club, Lake Worth.
Dale, like in, Chandra was just mentioning, the nurses have practice questions, the securities license practice questions that are not,
You do too, this whole book and the other book.
but online, and it's not unethical or a violation.
Well, it's fine, if you want to go study them, study them. They are not questions from the state exam, because if they are, that is a violation of state law. So if they're trying to make you think that it's questions from previous state exams, either they're lying through their teeth, or they're in violation of law. If you want questions, go to the other book. You've got 19 chapters here. You don't need questions from anywhere else. Okay. Hello. Again, I repeat, you've got this whole book, and you've got that other book with 400 and another 200, that's 600.
When do we have the other?
When I said,
Right in front.
And there are 100 on the exam.
yes. There's 100 questions on the exam. But here's the deal, people. If you think you're gonna memorize questions to pass the state exam, you're on drugs.
No.
That's why I don't teach questions. I teach concepts. Because if you understand the concept, it doesn't matter how they ask the question.
We get that.
But if you memorize this question to go with that concept, what about all the rest of the concepts? What if they ask the question over here? You're not gonna recognize it.
Dale, but acknowledging what you just said, my question was based on the same questions that's in the book, just having it's just the format, the delivery format to practice.
Well, there's flashcards in the other book.
That's so archaic.
Yeah, my daughter, who now almost has a PhD, that's exactly how she always studied. And she's teaching at FAU.
I like that.
You know what, people, listen, you want to study this question, knock yourself out. I'm not gonna tell you not to, maybe they'll help,
When you say format, what are you talking about?
the way they're structured,
The structure
the
of the
wording of the
question.
question.
No,
'Cause-
no, that's not what I meant. I just meant the delivery.
Oh,
The same
in other
way the
words-
questions are phrased in the book, but just online, so you can re-practice and re-practice the same questions. I mean, every profession has the book and the same you just go online and you're just studying online as opposed to in the book.
I just want you to understand that if you're doing those questions, those are not questions from previous state exams.
It never really is. It's just the,
I mean, that's exactly what it does for
Same
me.
like the question. we
But
posed.
if you find that helpful, knock yourself out.
it's just easier to study online than from the book.
But I hope that in the practice quizzes, you're not marking the answers in the book.
Well, that's why I'm asking that.
You don't answer the questions in the book. I told you that the first night. So that you can use them over and over and over again. And the class exam is a paper exam with 4 or 5 questions on a page. That's one of the comments I get about the state exam. Questions on the state exam obviously are on the screen, and you see one of them and their answers at a time. And a lot of people find it difficult when you got 5 or 6 to keep focused. What you want to do is take one of the back pages of the test and cover up everything with that question. Yes, ma'am.
How long do you get for the state exam, the time?
Class exam is 3 hours, state exam is 3.5. More than enough time. Unless you get somebody that really hasn't prepared themselves. But assuming that you prepared yourself, I've never had somebody come back and say, oh, I need more time. A lot of people say, I got too fast. I got done so fast, I was afraid I screwed up. No, all it meant is you knew what the hell you were doing. And that's why you finished fast. I finished in 45 minutes twice. Yeah. Because
Sure.
I probably got 10 or 15 points on the test just using test-taking techniques, which I've asked you to read in that other book, in the front of the book, which I'm sure you've done. And all the little games I play that you don't want to play are for that very reason. So if you're looking for excuses why you failed, I'm giving them to you. Now, from this point on, now we've had this little chat, everybody's going to participate, or I'm going to answer you face to face. I don't like doing it, but I got way too many people in this class that aren't participating, and I know after 40 years, if you don't participate in this class and take your shot, get it right, get it wrong, you're not going to pass it. You're going to screw up my passing average. Like hell, you're going to screw up my passing average. I've worked 40 years to get my passing average where it is.
That's all.
Okay. How long do I have to respond to a citation? Okay, here we go. She asked, how am I gonna remember numbers? I don't want you to look. How many days do you have to respond to a citation?
14 days.
15.
What numbers did I give you?
15.
I was just reading that if you fail to notify the commission that you moved, you have.
That's a non-compliance.
That's, well, it's listed here with the cost associated. So it's a citation. But they give you 14 days to give them a change of notice and 15 days for something, for.
I went to 30 days ago.
15 days to correct the minor violation.
No, it's 30 days.
40 is the worst case scenario.
To either accept or challenge the citation. That's on page 130.
Oh, I haven't gotten it yet.
We're there now.
Maybe we should have a sheet of all the days for violations, all the amount of time they.
That's a good idea to spend that much time on maybe 5 points. No. Now, the third thing that FREC can do is the administrative fine. And you notice that's the maximum of what?
5,000.
And then the last two are suspension and revocation. Let's put a bracket around each one of those. And then I want you to connect the two brackets together. Because when you study those two paragraphs, you got to study them as if they're one. Everybody look at me. Which one would have a time limit, a revocation or a suspension?
Suspension.
By the very word. If I'm not mistaken, I just told everybody not to look at the book, right? And I'm looking at 10 people or better who are looking at the book. Might as well be talking to the wall. Suspension can be one word that would describe suspension in time.
Temporary for period.
Temporary, right. Give me a word that would describe revocation in the idea of time.
Forever.
Thank you. Or permanent, temporary versus permanent. Because those two words may dictate which one they're looking for in a question. Oops, makes sense. But you know what? Temporary is 10 years per offense. Now, you know what? If you did enough to get suspended for 40 years, I seriously doubt they're going to suspend you. I think more likely it would fall where? Revocation. Now, in a little bit when I show you some samples, you'll notice there's a list of possible penalties for first offense, and then for second and third or subsequent. And you'll see some of them will have anywhere from reprimand to revocation. But if you go back to when I had you highlight, or strike it, well, just as we started this on 126, actually 127, where it says violations and administrative penalties at the bottom of the page. Yeah.
Where's that?
Yeah, 127, from line 21 to the bottom of the page. That justifies what I just said to you a minute ago. Mitigating circumstances. Because you know there are people that do something illegal, and depending on the severity of it, it'll dictate what the penalty may be. Well, same thing here. That didn't used to be the case. It used to be the case that they'd have a list of violations and they would be suspensions or revocation. And or a fine. Didn't used to have the notice of non-compliance. Didn't have the citation. So whether it was a minor little thing or a major thing, they basically were lumped in the same category. And they finally decided that that didn't make sense. They shouldn't have to go through a whole process that we talked about before, from complaint to guilty, for somebody that forgot to put a sign up in the office. That didn't require that much effort on the state's part. Put the stupid sign up like you're supposed to. If not, you're going to get hit with a fine. That makes a whole lot more sense. And as soon as the industry grew in number of people, you know, it becomes a question. And then, of course, the cutbacks in the state for investigators and stuff. So they now had more duties and less people, or less investigators.
Now, do they warn you first, do they give you a warning first before they start like, having you pay those fines? Like, for example, if you don't have the sign.
What'd you do?
You don't have the sign up, for example.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you think they're going to start that whole process we talked about because you don't have a sign up? Or do you think they would tell you, put the sign up, and you got 15 days? That's the 15 days we talked about before. But all those things you saw as citations, that's basically what's going to happen. Some of those are notices of non-compliance that you chose to ignore.
Tell in the sign example, how will they notify you? By letter?
Well, they probably notify you because how would they know that the sign wasn't there? Because they're standing in the office. So now we know how they're going to be noticed.
Ah, okay, I got it.
Anything like non-compliance, a lot of that stuff is going to be the administrative aspect of the office. And they're not endangering the public, but they are not following the requirements of 475 and the rules of the commission.
If it says associate, is the one that is doing wrong things.
Uh-huh. Is the broker aware of it?
No.
Okay. Has the broker had education that would have caused that person to know they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, but they chose to do it anyhow?
Yeah.
Yes or no?
Yes.
That's why we have all this damn training. That's why we have Sarah. We had to do that for us. You know what we did for us?
No, you do it to protect yourself.
Yes. And in the same process, we do what? We protect you. Because you know what? You can't keep up with all this stuff.
And then it's
Because you want to know a little secret? As soon as you learn a lot of this stuff, guess what they're going to do? They're going to change it. Every year, that book changes. 20% they tell us. Because, you know, after working with the same company, this is Catholic. Dearborn, out of Chicago. And the reason I like this book, I've been using this book for 40 years. And the questions and everything. You know, if they've had that long a relationship or longer with the department and with FREC, I like working with somebody that is tight with my boss. It makes life a whole lot easier. Because if they tell me to do something, I can be pretty assured that if I do it that way, not going to be a problem. And all this stuff has to be approved by the state. I could write my own book. What you'd have to go through to get it approved, only a college professor would understand. It's a nightmare. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. But there are things I talk about that are not in the book. Because this is not end-all be-all. This is the beginning of your career. Some people think it's the end. In other words, I don't need anything else other than this course. Seriously. They don't think they need training. because they think we're gonna do all the work for them. But that's another discussion. Looking at this paragraph of suspension and revocation, read the paragraph that's suspension first. 131. I'm sorry, you're right, 130. 130, line 12. Here's my question. In baseball, since we're having the playoffs and stuff now, 3 strikes and you're out. In real estate, how many strikes do you get?
2.
2. Why?
They just allow you to have 2 suspensions, and then you are without revocation.
Okay. It says there, second suspension will normally be grounds for revocation. Because it's kind of like, we let you off the hook first time, and now you're back. Another thing that you will see if you look at the list of people who have violated the law and been penalized, you will see a lot of them being sent back to the 45-hour post license. Apparently you didn't get it the first time. I've seen some with suspensions that were reasonably long, they were sent back through the whole process. Want your license back, you can go back and start over again. Yeah, I have one student that I know of that spent time in the federal facility for 10 years.
Real estate related?
Yes and no. Yes, he had a real estate license and he was doing real estate. He was also, so we're looking for. He's also a distributor.
Like a drug dealer?
Like talcum powder.
Oh.
Cocaine.
Okay.
A little snuff.
We're not doing good in the real estate.
Oh,
yeah.
Apparently, he was doing very well in the other business until he got going.
I was like, man, come here, coach. Come here, coach. I guess that's what happened to me in that 6th grade, just to wake up. 6th grade, show up on the field.
Well, you remember the person, Bob Solomon, I've mentioned a couple of times now, he's at Central Village over on Lyons Road. And he makes about $25,000 to $30,000 before he gets up every day. Why? Rental renewals. I was in there one day and he was doing a renewal and he had a question about the lease because it had changed that year. And that was the 5th renewal. I'm sorry, no, 10th renewal. And he got a commission and a transaction fee once a year for 10 years. And he's got a ton of those because I have to review every file, so everything. I know who's making money and who's not. So those of you that say, oh, I would never do rentals, get your nose out there. As a new person, you're handed a referral, you're going to work it like it's $1 million house because you got no choice. Unless you're out finding buyers and sellers, you've got no choice. We give you something, you take it, and you work it to death. But we get people turning their nose up. They won't do a rental.
That person's gonna
Guess
buy
how many
it.
times, how many shots you get at it if you have an attitude like that? What?
think the floor.
And you just had it.
I'll do anything for money, are you kidding me?
Well, I'm not, I wouldn't go that far.
I'll do it.
Wait a minute.
You need to be careful what you say. This group's got your numbers, so. All right, moving along. The next page, at the top, it talks about probation.
I don't see genuine.
In other words, sometimes instead of suspending you or even maybe revoking you, they'll put you on probation. I know we had a situation going on in a deal, and I was a little concerned about the other agent, not a little, a lot. So just out of curiosity, wanted to see if her name was on the list. Guess it was. It was. Guess what for? Potential bank fraud. She got 2 years probation and, I don't remember what the, education, probably either FREC 1 or 45 hours.
Does stuff come up before you're 18? Does stuff come up from before you're 18?
Yeah, unless it's been expunged.
Oh, okay.
You did something bad before?
Well, if it comes up, you didn't put it down, then they ask you about it.
Oh, no, I did.
Okay. See, if you put it there, unless it's something really bad, you're not gonna have an issue. In most cases, except for Halloween. All right. At the bottom of page, oh, I'm sorry. On page 131, that chart in the middle, the gray box, where it says licensure reissue. Let's say you're suspended for 3 years. At the end of 3 years, what happens? You're still suspended until you meet all other requirements,
The renewal requirement.
like retaking the course.
You need to start over again, is it?
Well, it depends.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen, most of them I've seen have not been going all the way back. It has been going to the post license, yeah.
Okay.
More or less, yeah. And then there's a course for brokers on escrow. In other words, they're not messing with the escrow, but they're not keeping their books right. There's a format that they should be following. And then, I don't know, it's a 4 or 5 hour course,
On the
which
45
fortunately
hour,
we won't be offering that here.
on the 45-hour course, how is that broken down? How many days or hours, or how do you break it
Well,
down?
it's the same as this, except it's 45, it's 13 nights instead of 18.
So where is it? Is it in here?
So you do training at night?
During the day?
No, we don't do training at night.
Oh, it's during the day? Oh, so
Training's
it's
always during the
So
day.
it's coming to work?
Yeah.
Oh, I got you. Not just on me.
Yeah.
The,
But everything is taken.
the scroll,
So if you can't make it,
if you work,
What about the continuing education?
the 45 hour we do at night.
Okay.
The reason we do it at night is for that reason, because we know we have associates who still have full-time jobs.
the escrow broker class is just if you open.
Nothing that you need to concern yourself with.
No, but I'm curious. It's like you need to know that to manage your escrow department?
No, you need to do that, so hopefully you don't do it wrong again and get in trouble. A course like that, if they're making you take that, it's because you screwed up, not because you didn't do anything. It's not a course given as a part of getting your license.
Okay, yeah, no, I just.
Sorry, I brought it up. Yes, sir.
I have a question about rental renewals.
Okay.
Say you have somebody who's renting out an apartment, Huntington Lakes, let's say, for a year.
Mm-hmm.
The agent finds that person for you.
Mhm.
You're an individual.
Mm-hmm.
After that first year is up, the person decides they want to rent it again
Mm-hmm.
for the next year. He's entitled, the agent, to a residual?
Mm-hmm.
Really?
If your contract states that.
Yep, listen to the agreement. says that.
Oh, wait, so if I can get residuals off of this?
See, I knew it would wake up because of what he did. That's why I say anybody that turns their nose, especially if you're working in communities that are seasonal. That's, the Central Villages and places like that. Yes, you have annual, but you also have as many seasonal. That's where they're making the real money, is in the seasonal.
Do we need to be aware if it's in a standard contract that says that the lease agreement is a standard, or some person may request for don't having it that way?
No, the documents that you use are dictated by the company.
By the company that is renting?
No, by the company you're working for.
Oh, by the company
By
that you're
signature.
renting.
We have a software program called App Files. In that App Files is every form you need
Okay.
to be a real estate agent.
And each company have their own rules?
Our own documents, yes.
Okay.
So if I sold,
The rules should be the same for everybody.
Oh,
if I sold 2 of those each month for 1 year, for 12 months, that's 24 units I sold, then next year I'll have at least 2 residuals every month, if they re-sign. Oh, wow, yeah, how can you not make money in real estate apartments? Are you serious?
and rentals are great.
And another thing too about rentals, a lot of people move here and they rent for a year or two until they, we love the house, don't know about the community. How's that gonna work with travel and work by relatives, all the things that you would do up north, but just, you brought them with you.
That's why
Your desires and concerns didn't change.
So that's how he makes 30 grand a morning, because he just has residuals.
Yes.
Oh, I'm gonna be in a Lamborghini by the time I'm 24.
That's good. It's a good vision.
Yeah. And I'll still run construction.
However, the typical customer you gotta deal with is gonna be a handful.
Oh, dude, come on. Live with my grandmother. They talk to me about a handful.
Take that and multiply it by 10. Okay. At the bottom of the page, let's go to court. Civil penalties, which are usually what? Judgments. Criminal penalties could be fines, court costs, could potentially be imprisonment. To be more precise with that, top of the next page. Lines, starting at the top of the page with that chart to line 15. Bracket. 132.
Star? No.
Not a star. Now, that third degree felony, notice it's DB per FREC, because that third degree felony is for unlicensed persons. FREC can't deal with unlicensed people. The only thing they can do, like I said, is mess with your application. But if you're out there practicing real estate and being compensated without a license, it's not FREC that's going to decide what happens to you. Now, is it quite possible that the state attorney's office would get involved with this part of it?
Yes.
Yeah, because if they're going to go to court and have them prosecuted, DB can't do that. State attorney's office can. Well, that we all know. That's big shakes. And then one more topic here. Starting on page 132 through on 132, starting from line 16, the heading is Real Estate Recovery Fund. Want to put a bracket from 16 to bottom of page, which is 26. And then it looks like 1 through 24 on the next page, including the chart. Which I guess that makes it the whole page. And then on 134, starting with line 1, ending with line 39. Because every time I say the whole page, somebody always says the whole page.
Star.
Two stars.
Where?
I don't get a chance to catch my breath so I can make the next sentence. It's on 134, both of them.
The whole 134.
The paragraph mandatory suspension as a start. We have 3 through 7. The other star
Oh, so it's right here?
starts with line 8 to 20, when they talk about claim resulting from an EDO. So the paragraph under mandatory suspension is one topic, and then the claiming results from, claiming resulting from. That's the first one. Now, let's go back and let's figure out what this is. A fund is usually something that someone can go to get reimbursement, correct? Is this fund designed to reimburse the public or licensees?
What was the question? Yeah, I didn't.
Is this fund designed to reimburse the public or licensees? I want you to look at me. Forget the damn book.
The plaintiff, the person who filed.
The public.
Well,
Is this fund designed to reimburse the public or to reimburse licensees? Let me say public. Anybody that didn't say public, get up and go home and leave me alone. I have told you when you're not sure whether it's the public or you. I notice you always pick you, which means there's no point you getting a license, you won't keep it long enough to use it. It's not funny. There is 30 or 40 questions where that little thought's going to be the difference between a 74 and a 75. And I've done it over and over and over again. Apparently the lectures need to have higher volume. Or you need to clean your ears out, one of the two. This whole thing is about who? The public. You're here to learn how to conduct yourself and what it is you have to know to be able to deal with the public. Because I know when I ask that question, because you haven't seen the notes, it's that could go either way. If you're not sure which way it goes, you got your choice between the public or a licensee. You now know how to answer that question. I've just saved you 30 points. Because every one of the scenarios that we've done, or it involved the licensee or the public, it was all about the public. It wasn't about me. But see, the problem of it is, you still think like a buyer or seller. You're not thinking like an agent. Remember first night? You told me you would. You lied. Because it's hard to break old habits. If you've never been an agent, it's hard to think like one. I can tell after the first hour or so in the room who's had a real estate license or be involved in depth in real estate. Because they don't have that eyes and lines. How many of you have decided you'll never pass this test? flyers. Now, let me set this up, and we'll run through some of the notes there. When a licensee violates the law, we said that we have administrative penalties, we have civil penalties, we have criminal penalties. Now, civil penalties usually involves what? Money. And they're reimbursed the public in money to compensate them for what that licensee did. But it's not that simple. First of all, it had to happen within the last 2 years. The licensee would have to have an active license at the time the claim is being made. You would have to show that you've got the courts to agree that they had done you wrong and you deserved compensation. It's called a what do you call that when you're awarded money? Judgment. Which will be your proof to FREC that what? They did me wrong and the courts feel I should be reimbursed. Now, I got one more hurdle before that fund will pay me. I have to prove that the licensee can't afford to. So it isn't simple enough to say, okay, I've got a judgment, I'm going to FREC and they're going to give me my money. No. Not like that simple. Is there probably a limit as to how much they will reimburse you? Everything else has a limit, so if I'm guessing the odds are, yes.
What happens if the licensee is inactive?
If they're inactive, they are not functioning as an active licensed person, therefore they shouldn't be doing this.
So the person is not going to get reimbursed?
No.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
So it's inactive, I'm not supposed to be doing anything anyhow. But the guidelines say that they have to be active. If you'll notice at the 132 bottom of the page, to the top of the next page is where they talk about what I just said. So basically, I have to file a complaint with the commission, but I then have to go to court and get the courts to agree that I'm entitled to compensation. Then I got to go back with proof of compensation and proof that the licensee is not capable of paying it. If you'll notice in that chart, the gray box, it's a good quick review of what happens here. Saves reading 3 pages. It says the fund reimburses who? Who are financially injured by a licensee. Licensee must hold an active license at the time of the alleged act and acted in the capacity of a real estate licensee in the transaction. Well, what if I was just a buyer? Yeah. Spouse of offending licensee is not eligible for reimbursement. So if you think you're gonna get the public to reimburse him for you, not happening. It goes on to say a civil suit will be filed, a final judgment issued against the licensee, and an attempt was made to collect on the judgment. The claim must be made within 2 years of the alleged act or within 2 years of the discovery of the alleged act. The maximum payment for one judgment is 50,000 for multiple judgments. It says more than one transaction is 150. So if you did whatever this was in 6 transactions,
You're dead.
well, I would have 50,000 for 3 of them. And then the rest of it, they'd have to figure out what to do. Now, this is a fund. A fund is like a creek, or a lake, or a pond. In order to have water, you have to have a source that's putting the water in there. Who's putting the money in there so the public can be reimbursed? Who do you think is? We are.
The brokerage.
Each time you renew, you may see an extra charge of anywhere from $3 to $7 when you renew. I haven't seen that in 10 or 15 years. Because the fund, once it hits $1 million, is it $1 million? Yeah, once it reaches $1 million, until it drops back to 500,000, the fee is not charged. Now, you can see number one, it isn't like people are going to be lined up to get paid. It's not that simple. Number two, they're allowed to invest a certain percentage of that money. So between all of that, and as you'll see in a minute, the licensee has to reimburse the fund if they want their license back. So eventually, the money's going to be back in there, or there's a non-licensee out there now. So ultimately, who's going to pay this?
The licensee.
The licensee. And that means you're going to get to pay for the ones who cause the money to come out. Continuing with the list here, it says, at time of payment from the fund because of misconduct, a licensee is?
Automatically suspended.
Until the money plus interest is paid back to the fund. Now, this is the only automatic penalty in 475. You don't see the word automatic anywhere else but right here.
Do we need a star?
No? I already given you the stars. Actually, it is a star, but it's on the next page. 134.
Yeah, you already said mandatory suspension.
Yes.
What says mandatory suspension on 134?
We got it.
Yeah, there's 2 stars.
I mean, 2 people.
That's the reason I didn't put the star on the other page, because it specifically spells it out here. Now, you remember when we talked about the 4 ways of resolving conflicting demands between buyer and seller? One of them was asking FREC to issue an escrow disbursement order. And I said, well, what if they did? I notified the buyer and seller that they had recommended I give it back to the buyer, so I tell the attorney to cut a check to the buyer. Seller goes ballistic. And I get notification from his attorney that they are suing me for X amount of dollars. If it's less than $50,000, FREC will entertain an escrow disbursement order. You understand why I said if it doesn't exceed 50,000. They're not going to even look at it if it's 60 or 70 or 80,000. Why? They can't cover it. Now, I'll explain that in a minute. Because they can't take out more than how much for somebody?
50,000.
If it's multiple transactions, the most is 150. So if it's 60,000 for one transaction, that's more than the fund is going to give out. Now, So I did what FREC told me to with the escrow disbursement order, and I gave the money back to the buyer. I got sued by the seller. I got hit with a $30,000 judgment and $5,000 in court costs and attorney's fees. Reasonable attorney's fees. Because you know in situations like that, people, you lose, you pay. So I'm out $35,000 because I did what my boss told me to. Somehow that doesn't seem fair. Well, it's not. And up to $50,000, they will reimburse the licensee plus court costs and attorney's fees. That's why they really don't want to do the escrow disbursement order. They'd much rather you either litigate, mediate, or arbitrate. They really don't want to get involved. But 475 says it's an option that as a licensee, obviously in this case a broker, would have the right to choose. But you can understand why, if they feel it's still going to, it may still go to court after they make a decision, they won't make a decision. They will recommend that you litigate. Now you understand why it's wonderful that we don't have an escrow account? That was good news when I was interviewing for the job. Because Ben wasn't interviewing me for what he thought he was interviewing. When I met with Jack and Ben the first time, you know, they knew who I was, but they figured, hey, you're somebody that'll bring a whole lot of associates behind them. You know, in other words, I'd be like a team leader. Then I explained to them why I really wanted to be here. And you know what? Fortunately, I was sitting with two very smart men who realized that the key to a strong company is the quality of its agents. The quality of the agents. And I kicked in the idea one might want to think about offering classes, because I'm not totally thrilled with the quality of the licensee that I see coming from other places. So I figured this works great. I have control of you for the rest of your life. Well, at least for the next 2 years.
Worse than mine.
My life doesn't matter. Once it's over, I don't have to worry about you no more. Now,
Can I ask just a question in regards to that? So the seller doesn't want to sign off on paying the buyer the money. But in the case that I used as an example of what happened to me personally, the seller didn't care, and they were signing off. It was the two realtors that were holding my escrow money and didn't.
they can't hold your escrow money.
They did for 6 months. I had to
They have
fight.
no right to hold your money.
They said that they felt they earned their commission.
Well, then they have to go to the seller. You
I
didn't
got the
agree to pay
money,
them.
But I had to retain an attorney in order to get my money. And it was $10,000, so it
Yeah.
certainly worth my
See,
while.
but you know from what you've learned here,
Mm-hmm,
that that's illegal.
right.
I would have filed a complaint.
I wasn't educated enough to understand it. I had an attorney, and I was so happy to get the money back, so it
Is
was.
your attorney a real estate attorney?
Yes.
And he didn't advise you to file a complaint?
Yeah, I did, and that's how I got the money back. But
Yeah, but see, once the fight begins with the escrow money, the attorney is holding it. Is just gonna step back and basically say, well, when you guys get it worked out, you let me know and I'll cut the check.
So if.
Now, a broker couldn't do that if it was an escrow account broker, but if it's an attorney or a title company that's holding it, they basically can, just like I said, sit back and say, when you guys get it worked out, you let me know and I'll cut the check. Which means you now get out of the way. You can't, if that was your customer there, we're talking here, I have to advise her to seek legal counsel at that point. Why? It's above my pay grade. So it's definitely above your pay grade. You don't advise them. The only advice you give them is they need to seek legal counsel. Because there's nothing we can do for them at that point. And I apologize for the back and okay. Any questions on this recovery fund before we move on? Just for kicks and giggles on 138 and 139. And 140 and 141.
You want to memorize this, right?
Yes.
Okay.
What about this?
I'm showing you this because of the statements that I made about the fact that you can see, because of mitigating circumstances, you could have anywhere from a reprimand to a revocation for a given offense. And you see that when you just look down the page. Now, these are violations of the rules, which are tied to 475. But if you started down through this list and looked at it, you would see a lot of terms or scenarios or situations that we talked about. You know, things you can do, the things you can't do. And if you don't do the things you can do, and you do the things you can't, you'll be on that list somewhere. But now, you are going to be asked about this, but not in this kind of format. This is all the stuff we talked about.
It's kind of like a summary, isn't it?
Yeah. But this is right out of the rules of the commission. This is what, this is what it looks like. Okay, let's go to chapter 7. All right. This chapter, the heading says federal and state laws pertaining to real estate. The first area that we're going to talk about inside, it's at the bottom of page 145. It's called the Federal Fair Housing Law. Now, a little caveat here. There's topics here that we need to discuss, and given present circumstances in the world, everybody's got a very strong emotional opinion about them. So we have to be big boys and big girls and realize that we're discussing how we have to handle this as a licensee. It's not about all those different categories of people that we're not supposed to discriminate against. Those include appendages on handicapped people. A duck.
What?
That is an emotional support animal with papers.
Oh,
Is not a duck. It is part of that person. An appendage. And those cute little fur balls that make me feel so good.
Well, Yorkies,
I don't know what they are.
those things are.
Oh, they're designer dogs.
I'm getting one.
I don't mean to be offensive to anybody, but it kills me. They talk about these little dogs and they're mixed breeds. And they're called what, designer dogs?
Yeah.
Well, I grew up and called them buds.
That's right.
I mean, but think about it. You know, you're growing up and a dog was from 3 or 4 different categories of dogs. They were months.
Most of them do.
Now they're much more
Yeah.
extremely expensive. Who knew? I should have bought a whole bunch of them. When nobody wanted them. Well, my big dog.
Yeah, I got a raw one.
Now,
I always say that.
we'll talk about that because that's probably today's biggest issue
In rental
when it
communities.
comes to discrimination, is dealing with these service animals or emotional support. They're not, you can't use the word animal. They're not a pet. They're a companion or they're an appendage. They perform a service for their owner. Some of them are things like their eyes, their ears. And it's been proven that dogs and cats and other animals make people feel good.
Yeah, but that's true.
Because you know that for you, I remember even as a kid, they used to take dogs or cats to the nursing homes.
Still do?
And they still do. Why?
It makes people feel
It
happy.
makes people feel good. So if you're saying, well, you know, it doesn't make any sense, this is BS. No, there's medical research to prove that someone who has mental issues receives relief from these appendages.
Your dog keeps you sane.
Yeah.
Explain why.
Well, they do love your condition.
Well, but sometimes they may love you unconditionally, but they're mad because you left, so they left you something.
Yeah.
No, my dog's funny. He kicks in my door every day. I can have it closed every day at 6:20.
Well, because you're supposed to be up, what the hell's wrong with you?
Bro.
I understand that, I gotta go.
Single day.
All right, let's get into this, please. Bottom of page 145 is the first. It's the Civil Rights Act of 1866. The paragraph should be highlighted and starred.
The 18 to the 24?
The last paragraph on the page. Page 145. Does the 1866 Act deal with all types of real estate or just housing?
Housing.
Any real estate
It's
transaction.
discrimination. But the title says housing.
My question is
Sale of.
it for real estate or is it just for housing?
Real estate. Without exception.
Also, and there would never be an exception to race. Because it's in every transaction. So there is no exceptions as to when you can technically discriminate on the basis of race. You'll understand as I go through this what I just said. You also have to remember, one point in our history, this act was created.
Civil War?
Yeah,
Yeah, that was
right at the end of the Civil War.
pretty far back.
Yeah.
So on this day, private housing, so
I don't know. Be interesting to be a fly on the wall during that period of time.
I wouldn't want to.
Of course, growing up in Virginia, that was like half the history course.
Yeah, right. That's like the most racist state in the world.
I'm not thinking about that, I'm thinking about the historical events
That happened.
that occurred.
Oh, yeah. There was a lot of war there.
Okay? But that's not the issue. The issue, you know, there was a lot of issues that were part of the Civil War. One of them, obviously, was the slave issue. But there were also other issues they were fighting for.
Native Americans.
And the country was divided. The southern states were the agricultural states.
Yeah.
The northern states are more industrial,
Yeah, we were building.
which means it's great if we want to feed somebody. It's not too good if we want to go to war. Because we don't have,
Food and winter.
well, not the food.
They-
I don't have the hardware
Yeah.
to sustain
The
a war.
resources, yeah.
So I would have been a Yankee and you would have been a Confederate and we would have been fighting against each other.
Now, I probably would have,
I'm from Boston, my ancestors, so you know how
Well,
we're all about the tea
I
party.
can't relate to that, but I can relate to the Vietnam War. My number is 192.
Oh, no, my grandfather's in there.
192, it got to 172 one year. Out had a history class. Fortunately, I was in school and I got classified as F.
21.
So that was another motivation to keep my grades up. You know, that was another issue. I had a cousin, idiot, went over there twice. But that's for another day. Going back to the Civil Rights Act of 1866, it says there, any real estate transaction with no exceptions.
Okay.
It's also on, not the next page, but the page after, when we get there, they define what each one of these terms mean. On the top of 146, the three main Civil Rights Acts are 1866, 1964, and the Fair Housing Act, that one was 1968.
Is that started?
Kennedy was,
It started
63.
around,
62 is when Kennedy was.
I don't remember what year, but I remember where it was.
I wonder what was it like to wake up after Kennedy got shot?
I didn't wake up at the playground, and one of my friends came running down the hill from the playground.
Oh, yeah, so you were a kid. Sorry. That sucks.
Yeah, that was interesting.
That family is hurt.
Whatever.
is there a story?
Now, I want to know the difference between the Civil Rights Act of 1964 versus the Civil Rights Act of 1968.
1968.
Okay, 64. What's 68? I don't see any 68.
Well, if you go down to line 17 through 34, you'll see both of them.
1964 denotes public accommodation.
Yeah, but
Public.
Yeah, but
64 is public.
And
68
is single.
housing.
Housing.
How do I know that? Because it says so.
it says fair housing.
Because the nickname for the Civil Rights Act of 1968 is the Fair Housing Act. We don't call it the Civil Rights Act of 1968, we call it the Fair Housing Act. Because it deals specifically with housing.
That was in my history class.
Makes sense. Now, the question is, they have something called protected classes.
Oh, like
People you can't discriminate against. If you'll notice, it's mentioned in the paragraph under 1964. It's mentioned under the paragraph for 1968. And then there's a chart on the next page that shows the current list, except for one. Familial status, race, sex, handicap status, color, religion, national origin. Now, the list of protected classes on page 146 under the Fair Housing Act don't include all of them. Because on that there, they don't mention familial status and handicap, which is mentioned at the top of 147.
I guess the 1864 is kind of like an addendum, kind of like an adding more.
What?
No, it's kind of adding.
Which one?
The second one, the 64.
68.
The 68, sorry.
Well, the amendment to it was on 1988.
No, I understand, but,
The Civil Rights Act of 1866.
no, it's the 66 that has the handicap.
No, 66 has race, and that's it.
So, okay.
The 1964 Act is about public places.
Accommodation.
Accommodation. But, you said that that is missing,
From the 1968 Act,
uh-huh.
the two things that are part of the amendment of 1988 are familiar status and
That is what I
handicap.
meant, the amendment, yeah, okay.
Familiar status and,
That amendment added, an amendment usually adds to something. It added two more categories.
What about sexual orientation?
it says,
On page 147, lines 7, 8, 9, and 10.
Medicine Brockett?
Yes, to answer her question. Sexual orientation in Palm Beach County is a protected class. Two more, and I can't think of them right now.
Can you repeat that again?
In Palm Beach County, sexual orientation is a protected class. It's not on the federal law. But they said to you there that local laws may add to the list. The other one is transsexual. That's not the term they use, but I can't think of the term. That's another protected class. Gender.
Transgender.
Transgender,
Yeah,
thank
but, all the sexual,
you. In Palm Beach County, they are a protected
yeah.
class.
The sexual orientation.
But they're not gonna be a protected class on the desk. Because statewide, that's not the case. Or nationally, it's not the case. Because obviously, these are federal laws. But just so you'll know for the future. And again, that is county by county.
LGTB.
Question?
But can I ask a question?
Mhm.
It says that it's not in the sexual orientation, it's part of the protection, but.
It's not part of
You
the
discriminate against them.
You can't discriminate against them
That's
because
what
they're
I'm
not a
saying.
protected class. As far as the test is concerned, you can't discriminate against them because, you can't discriminate against them because they're not a protected class.
From the federal.
However, if you're out in real life in Palm Beach County and you're doing business, you cannot discriminate. Does everybody understand that? Because I don't want to confuse it. Because the reason what I'm telling you now isn't in the book, because it's not everywhere.
No federal.
Each local government can make that decision themselves. Obviously, they can't get rid of what's here, but they can add to it. And we know a lot of those things are up for challenging, and this issue with the emotional support and service.
Isn't that ADA?
Yeah. That has more, that has more to do with, well, yeah, it would fall under ADA, which is mentioned over here a little bit. At the bottom of page 147, they mentioned the fair housing poster. If you want to see what it looks like, it's on the next page. This would be an example of a notice of non-compliance if you didn't have this. I noticed, not long ago, actually, when I first came here, I noticed that none of the offices had that poster. And about 5 years ago, we had investigators show up at the Pembroke Pines office of Central Village. Compliance was a favorite term. She said it once, she said it 6,000 times. Now,
What is blockbusting?
hmm?
Blockbusting.
I haven't got there yet. We'll get there. I'll tell you what it is, it'll make sense. Yeah, blockbuster, yes. On page 149, it says Fair Housing Act covers 2 categories of housing. The first one is single-family housing. It says residential property that is not privately owned. For example, a HUD foreclosure. Privately owned residential property if a licensee is employed to sell or rent the property. I'm on page 149. It says residential property owned by a person who owns 4 or more residential units in total. Residential property when the owner during the immediate past 2 years, 2-year period, sells 2 or more houses in which the owner was not a resident. Flipping, we call that. Multifamily dwellings of 5 or more units. Multifamily dwellings of 4 or fewer units if the owner does not reside in any of the units. Now I have a question. You come to list my house, and I tell you, I don't want you to show it to anybody that's Irish.
Hey, that's
I own 1 single-family residence, the one I live in. You are interfering with my right to discriminate. Because read that one where it says about the licensee and take the licensee part off. What if I'm for sale by owner? And guess what? I technically can discriminate, except for race. Thank you. Went over that. $8,000. What's the one you can never discriminate against in any situation? Race. I don't want to have to do that again. Thank you.
So, I have a question.
So here's the deal. The owner can discriminate, you can't. Therefore, you prevent them from doing what they have the right by law to do. However, there's a little asterisk beside of that that says be prepared for a lawsuit if you do such. But, technically speaking, if I read the wording of the law, it allows me to discriminate as a single-family homeowner, as long as I don't have that thing that happens in 2 years. How about this? I own a fourplex, and I live in one of the units.
You can.
Can I discriminate?
No.
Absolutely. Because it says, if the owner doesn't occupy any of the units. Well, what if I do occupy one of the units? Then, technically, I can discriminate.
Except for.
No, by.
I only accept applications from females. Now, let me rethink that. If I rent to females, that means I'm going to have testosterone all over my doors. So maybe I should rent to females. Oh no, then I'll have shotgun holes in the door. Maybe I'll just sell this damn place.
Maybe you just
When
rent
your
a
house is
couple.
gonna look like the Jackson Pollock thing, the next is just gonna be a problem. I don't don't think
What
I'm
happened
gonna
if the
So-
people, if some of the customers wants to rent their houses and they say, I don't want any kids?
Don't want any kids? I don't think kids is on the list, is it?
Yeah, and,
Age, family status.
Family status, that would be in there?
There are some communities that do discriminate against kids,
Yeah, 55 and up.
but on the basis of age. Not because of age, not because of the kids, because of their age. We'll get to that in a minute.
So, if, on this test, if we know that race is the only criteria that can't be discriminated against, except for these minor.
But that doesn't include race. Those still don't include race.
Right, I'm saying, with the exception of that, then almost anything, single-family home can be discriminated, except for
If the
race.
owner's selling it themselves, or renting it themselves. Not if you're involved.
okay.
If you're involved, you're the problem.
But I see it.
Now, wait a minute. I don't care what you've seen out there. I'll get to out there in a minute. You need to understand what's here first.
Okay, I was about to have a house for rent, and I said, no pets, and the person have an service animal.
Well, that's two different things.
Exception.
I'll get, let me hold off on that issue. Everybody got it? Okay. Now, out there, if they tell you that they don't want you to show it to anybody that's Irish, you know they can do that. You know you can't. So probably the best thing to do is to pass on that listing, or to pass on that buyer.
That's what I wanted to do.
But see, you have to know the law, so you know what you can and can't do without getting in trouble. I don't want to give away money. I don't want to just toss somebody aside. That's how I make my living. People are how I make my living. Unfortunately, there are a certain group of people that I can't deal with because of their attitudes and feelings. I don't have to agree or disagree with it. That's irrelevant. We're talking about this from a professional level, not from a personal level.
In other words, excuse me, as an agent, sales associate, you can reject.
Yes. Well, somebody asks you to do something illegal. Can you refuse to do it?
Yes.
And that includes your broker, which I don't think he will ever do. But you can always reject anybody who wants you to do something illegal. You're supposed to.
Against you or the company.
That's something I need to think about. But my point being made is, I can't run away from everybody that comes along that I might have an issue with. I've got to see if we've got a common ground to work on so that there is no violation.
Work it out.
But if I don't know what the law says, I don't know what my parameters are. So I'm going to get in trouble because I didn't realize I was getting in trouble. Because this is not an easy topic to deal with. At the bottom of page 149, it talks about housing for older people.
Favorite group.
That is what, please.
What's that stand for? What's the POPA stand for? I'll give you an idea. On 149, look at line 16.
Popeyes, housing for older people,
What's the A stand for?
association.
Uh-uh.
No,
Act.
Act.
Remember, it's a law.
Okay, oh yeah, there you go.
Which means any condominium I deal with, or even the homeowners association, I need to determine if they're HOPA certified. Because they don't have to have 100% of at least one person who's 55 plus. someone who is not 55 in most of these associations can purchase. They just can't occupy until they hit 55. I don't know, maybe. Her comment, well, they could rent it. The answer, it depends. Because a lot of them have a 1 or 2 year period when you initially purchase the property before you rent it. And that seems to be becoming more and more common.
Yeah.
Why? Because these condo and homeowners associations, there's a lot of renters in there. And unfortunately, we know historically, renters don't take as good a care of their home as an owner would. For reasonably obvious reasons.
So,
Dale?
Yes.
What 19 says, at least 80% of the units are occupied by one or more person 55 years of age.
Right.
So, you can sell 20% of Central Village.
Oh, but see here, what you don't know is a lot of the associations reserve that 20% for the heirs of the current owners.
For what?
For the heirs of the current owners.
The kids.
So the kid who is now 52, his mother dies, and he has the possibility of being able to take over that unit and live there.
Yeah.
If they have room in that 20%.
Yeah, but in that case, you probably can sell it for persons under 55 years old. Is that the case?
Depends on the association.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It depends.
I gave you the answer. That is the answer to the question. Because a lot of them have different rules. That's why, as you get out there, you've got to get familiar with the rules of each one of them. So it's not, I can't give you a black and white answer.
Yeah, but it still has a doubt. The homeowners association can, don't say they have or they must, they can sell for persons under 55. If they want, if they decide so.
They have to change the
if
rule.
the commission decides so, they can do that?
It depends. What does the rule say?
Yeah,
Whatever
yes,
question you're
yes,
going to
yes,
ask me from this
uh-huh.
point, that's going to be the answer.
Yeah.
Because it's not a black and white answer. It depends on the rules of a given association.
I agree what we're saying, depends. So my answer is yes. My own answer is yes, they can, if they want to. Right?
Depends on the rules.
Yeah.
It's not a yes.
The condominium.
It's not a yes and it's not a no. It depends on the rules.
I agree on that.
All right, we're going to take a break here in a second, but let's talk about the service animals and emotional support animals. They are not animals. They are not pets. This is not open for discussion. You're going to sit there, mouth closed, and listen.
Okay.
I don't care if you like what you hear. Is that crystal clear? We're not getting into a debate here. There is no debate. You have a buyer or a tenant that wants to see a property, and they tell you they have a emotional support or a service animal, you cannot ask them for proof. The owner of the property or the association can. So, you know there's no pet community. You have told your buyer it's a no pet community. Buyer doesn't care because the buyer doesn't have any pets. They have a service, whatever. Or they have an emotional support. Let me finish. They are not pets. They are not animals, even though they are. And you cannot charge a specific security deposit for that service animal or emotional support. You can for a
Pets.
pet. So if they said pets not allowed, there's no bearing upon me. Because what I have is going to be one of those two things. And I do have the documentation, and there is documentation that is typically required by the association. A lot of associations today have a separate application for the service animal emotional support. Picture of the animal, letter from a vet, letter from a doctor, and there's something that you have to go online and get. Those were the 4 things that a community in Delray required of my buyer. And it was a separate application. But as long as they had that information, they could not be denied. Well, they can deny it, but it's called lawsuits. And they're losing.
Does that also include for deaf and blind?
No.
They cannot charge them higher security.
Well, wait. What do you,
For higher security deposit.
so they have a service animal.
Right.
They can't discriminate.
Can't.
Yeah, they can.
It's not the book. Don't bother looking in the book. It's not in the book. Yes.
What if an owner, like say it's a rental, and they don't want an animal at all?
Because they are allergic to animals.
That's what I was gonna ask you.
We've got that going on a lot. Doesn't change anything.
What was that? My question was.
So you couldn't deny somebody to rent your house because they have a dog?
Nope.
No.
No.
These
No,
are
no,
specific
They
dogs.
have a service animal,
That's
service
what
animal.
I mean.
Yeah,
Well, you guys say that, people. Because you say dog,
yeah.
dog says pet. The answer is no.
Dale, I had that situation because I have respiratory problem, but on the addendum, it says no pets or smokers, and the property manager, go ahead with it. Would, if a lawsuit were filed, would I be the one that is liable, or the property manager for not, for telling
Who's
me?
I?
Pardon?
Who are you?
The owner of the property.
Yes, because they go after the association and after you.
Because I always put no pets, no
No problem.
pets.
You can put no pets all day long. That doesn't mean, it has nothing to do with our
But if it's a
discussion.
service dog, you have.
Does everybody understand that if it says no pets, you can ignore it if you have a service animal
They're talking about service.
or
Well,
emotional support?
well, that's what I was trying to get to. If it were that it was an emotional support and the property manager didn't clarify that with me, would I still be liable?
Yes.
Just wanna know.
Whether you would be penalized is another story.
Okay.
Now, let me show you what happens to you if you don't do exactly what I just said. Whether it makes sense or doesn't. We had an agent, I won't say what office, who was going out with a husband and wife looking to rent. And they had emotional support. And she said, now you know this community doesn't allow pets. So there's really no point in me showing the unit.
Oh, brother, staring.
End result of that, they called the local fair housing office. And guess what? That agent got a call from the person at the local fair housing act. And informed them they were in violation of fair housing. They had to take a course. They had to do X number of service hours.
With dogs, I hope.
Service dogs particularly.
You can't ask for verification. If they tell you that the dog, a bird, pig, whatever it is, I mean, don't laugh because every one of those
And I rephrase the question I asked earlier, okay, in 1988, under the Fair Housing Amendment Act, it says people with physical or mental impairments that limits major life activities, such as blind and deaf individuals may not be charged a higher security deposit.
Right.
Is that still into law?
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of the law.
Because you could have something about the head, it's something about the deaf.
So it's real simple. If they tell me they have emotional support or a service animal, I have to take them at their word. I show them property, and I make them aware that they do not allow pets. But that's like a stupid thing, because if they've got the documentation, they're not a pet.
And
They're not considered an animal. They are considered an appendage or whatever you want to call them, because they help with life functions.
And
Yes.
what happens if the owner of the property don't want anybody who have even the emotional support, the pets? There's no pets, nothing.
Well,
So
then
it's
I would
just say
say,
that you don't do it.
let's assume we made an offer on the house.
Yeah.
And whether it's rental or sale, doesn't matter. And they rejected it. It's a rental, and they rejected it. If I was selling it, I could care less.
Yeah.
But they're renting it, and they don't want pets.
Yeah.
They're allergic to animals.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a problem. The tenants don't have an animal.
Yeah, but they have a super.
You're laughing. They do not have an animal. They are not animals. Whatever they are, they're not animals. They're appendages.
How come they become not an animal?
Because the law said so. Because mom said so. I knew you were going to ask me that question. You know what? Nobody gives a shit you don't like it.
I don't like it at all.
I don't give a shit. But I will say this much on a more serious note. You better be damn careful. Unless you want fair housing on your ass.
I think I'm gonna sell my townhouse. I'm not gonna rent it anymore. I'm serious about it. Because I want any.
No problem.
Yeah,
You reject somebody for something?
period. I rebuilt it myself inside. Sorry.
Oh my God.
It's okay he has the right to reject them. But that person then has the right to sue them.
Okay.
And if he's got a license, he's gonna be spending some time in civic.
No, I don't have a license yet, sir.
And
They have the right to sue me.
And we're
I have the
getting
right to
work.
go to court and say to the judge, I don't want to animals in my unit.
No problem.
Okay.
Then there's no problem. If you want no animals, there's no problem.
Ignorance
They
of-
are animals.
Ignorance of the law is no
I
excuse.
cannot see.
They are
how
company
they become not an animal.
Mom? Yes.
So literally, you have to suck it up and take that person with the
With
service
the
dog.
dog. And what happens?
Unless you want to call from the fair housing office, that's your option.
Okay.
Because
you
if they
have
call the fair housing
conversation,
office before the day's over, they're gonna be in your face.
And can you tell the rentals that you don't want them? And because you have another one?
But you understand, it's okay for them to say, it's okay for you to say in your listing,
I mean, you can't help
no
it,
pets.
but you just say.
But understand that these emotional support or service animals are not pets. They're not even considered
I don't
animals.
like that. I said I don't like the owner.
What
I
if
don't want the little
What if you had a possible tenant and they didn't tell you ahead while they were doing the application that they had a pet?
Right.
And
No, wait a minute.
And then they're
Do
moving.
they have a
That
pet?
they have a
Or
service.
do they have a service animal?
What if they don't report that at all and they move
I asked
in?
you a question. I can't answer your
Service
question.
animal, say service animal.
Okay, so what if they have a service animal, but they don't report it when they
Emotional
file the
support.
application?
Right.
They move in and then the association says, whoa, wait a minute, we can't have pets.
No, it's
Yeah,
not.
but it's
No,
not
it's
that.
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
I mean, we
This
can't.
is my job, not yours.
Service animal.
The next step will be
And
to
I don't-
call their attorney. who will probably turn around and call the local fair housing office.
And then again,
And then the association better get their attorney awake, because here they come. Yes.
How about this? So if you have because I have a lot of rental houses, and I have people fill out an application, and I ask if they have pets. I allow pets, but I have large single-family homes, so everybody that rents them has pets. So if you put on there, like, do you have a pet or service animal, and you said both,
You can't ask.
Can't even ask.
You can't ask about service.
You're talking about as an agent, putting it in the MLS?
as an agent.
On like a rental, say the owner, let's say the owner.
Uh-huh.
You can ask. Yeah, the owner should be able to.
Because if they answered no, and then this situation, like they moved in
It
and
wouldn't matter.
poof, doesn't matter, okay.
They can lie through their teeth.
But you can ask for the documentation.
So they can.
But see,
Right.
you as an owner
You
can ask,
Yeah, you can.
do you have documentation?
Yeah. But not as an agent.
But not as an agent.
Right, right. And if they lie as an owner on your application, you have.
That's a different, if they lie on the application, that's a different story.
That's a different story, okay. Just wondering.
Like anything else. See, you have to realize that this is such a broad thing that they haven't narrowed it down. But the simplest way is this. I'm an agent. Let's talk about it from an agent perspective and nobody else. I'm an agent. I've got a tenant or a buyer, doesn't matter which. Because it may not mean anything to the owner if they're selling, but it will mean something to the association. Because that new buyer coming in is coming in with that dog, a bird, a cat, or elephant. Elephant might be pushing it. They have the right to ask. They have the right to ask for proof. We, as agents, do not.
But once the condominium association, not the realtor, the condominium association requests and gets the paperwork, they have no recourse to deny if it's in place.
Right, legally.
Legally.
They can simply say to you, we're denying you because we don't want that animal in here, because this is a no animal community. And then you can politely say, you'll be hearing from my attorney.
Oh. And they don't want to be sued, so they have to.
But I heard that there's a couple associations that I know of have hired attorneys.
Yes,
Is that like
that?
it is. Mine was the case where someone came in without telling them, and they went ballistic. Of course, there are a big camp of people who are supporting it, but those poor people who moved in were treated as pariahs.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have money, that is the problem. If you have money, you can fight back.
No, yeah, they had plenty of money.
Oh, but you could fight that. You got the lawyer to lawyer, attorney to attorney.
They made it very uncomfortable.
But see, it's not that. Yes, you can win, but then everybody in the building hates you.
Right.
And they'll make you miserable enough until you wind up listing the property and selling it. That's what she's talking about.
Oh, okay.
But we are in a very precarious position. Because there's no way of winning in this situation. One side or the other, or both, are not gonna like us. But you know what? Goes with the territory. Now, I have a feeling there'll be some further interpretations of that. But right now, they do not have to give me any evidence of a service animal. Now, you know, in today's world, since it's such a big deal, if somebody's got a service animal, 9 times out of 10, they're going to tell you right up front. Every once in a while, you'll have someone that, well, they wouldn't tell you the truth about anything, but because they know what they do. They know that they got the upper hand at this point. So, if I've got the situation and I'm not sure how to handle it, you better seek some advice from one of the managers before you move forward. like I said, you don't want to be doing, course, it was called, sympathy training. Being more conscious of people's desires and beliefs.
Yeah, but that is important.
I agree.
That is important.
Agree. But I love the part of the fact that they're not animals. Obviously, they had to make that separation because they had to separate away from pet. The only way they could separate away from pet is to say that these things are not animals. So they basically are part of that person. And they serve a life function or assist with a life function. To me, I can accept that a whole lot more with the service animal than I can the emotional. But, like I said, there's plenty of medical proof that those two kind of animals are helpful. We know the service animal. And the service animal is trained specifically to do certain things, which is very different than the emotional support. And
So
they don't need to be trained.
easy to apply that emotional animal? Is that possible? Someone just send their own pet just to apply some document and then?
The emotional support animal is also included with the support animal, right? Yeah, the emotional support, you can pay $35 online and get a certificate.
Yeah. But you still have to have a picture of the animal, obviously. And you have to have a letter from a doctor, that you're under the care of a doctor, and the doctor has prescribed,
Any doctor, you can
consider a drug.
It's federal statute, and the trumps supersedes state law and the HOAs. It's that plain and simple.
And the easiest way is handling is, if they want to see it, you show it to them. And then let the owner and or the association be the ones to kick them out. Okay, we're way past the break.
Property management part, and I charge you. I wasn't a real estate license person, but I do for me and my girlfriend had a few issues of whatever. And I'm still on fucking up here trying, so for me, it's not something that I appeared none to it. I have from my system, so smoking, dust, everything. So when I go in I would say,
Thank you very much for saying that. I have one unit that I did 3 months ago.
people that,
And I need
well,
to go to the
one guy, the neighbors told me you had birds or whatever. I had no insurance company, you have to just have to pay $2,000 also on the house once a year. Well, what I did, I kept the small side, like the granny side, so I can, because they stay there when they come down. So I rent the main part of it was my mom's house, and that was my side, and my mom said I was self-contained built it. So I would have to share space with anybody because I'm so sensitive. So I never rented that small side.
No, you don't want to tell them.
So the main part of the house is rented.
I was very
And
concerned.
the property manager has never clarified to me ever about that
And you can
kind
even
of stuff.
require
I
somebody to
mean,
fill
I
out
could
a
have
short
gotten in
application
trouble
before they
because
send
the
you
owner,
progress.
someone had an emotional
So like I normally request them to
support.
because my
down.
homes are between 400.
That's what I was asking, would I have been punitive, but the law extends to me, even if the broker was negligent in not clarifying that, or telling me that I
So
couldn't do
I
that.
make sure, you know, somebody that's not there necessarily.
Oh, I have every documentation. I've had documentation to just their medical team come before them checking out, if I pick up a rearrange season and they fly, and they put me on other things because I had whoever interpreted it, not just pet, and put me beside emotional care, and one lady
What I
put
do,
it
I do,
and all of a sudden, started telling her, she was like, are you okay?
That I make sure that something's like the metal are actually enough, they're very good, I'm like, you know, but they know the house is like, you know, it's not, I'm not selling like it now, I'm not selling. You know, they probably say different furniture, exactly. When I put them on, oh my God, obviously the person they use to move is for airport security, it's not insurance, you know.
And the man that they were, because they were putting us in jeopardy, I figured that if it had a license from the
I know what he's saying, you have to accept mom's house.
That's how I learned.
Being an animal. It's a certain like you said,
Right, well,
I
and
said
the
that
reason
much
you
better
have
than
to,
worship. Not being one animal. Never, ever. 75. Because
Because I feel like more than half the population don't worry. So now your population down, right? Whereas like if you go to a dog or whatever, I have like $3 per month for I bought that it won't be enough for security, especially if you would do a tournament first and choose 2 months of security rather than first month.
First, last, and
Right, so, but if you're really worried about damage, and I'm okay. Like I said, outside of housing gates, are also I didn't close it, but the rent's like $2,000 right? And it's just a small housing university. And, I used to pay the deposit on my web damage. I used the first month, and the security, it's not last. Because the last month just could be different. Now, no, they can have something they damage.
And I know the boss himself, if they have an animal, it's not gonna cost you much. Because when you put the house next to it, I know that the owner, they live for the renovation rental, and the guy was excellent, good neighbor, my friend, he becomes my almost friend. He has 2 good dogs. He demolished the house.
I've never.
$1,400. For rebuild a townhouse, if they done the whole drywall, the whole stairs, the whole baseboards, everything.
So I never, they can do any problems. Personally, and I don't think that my mom has either. I mean, not that you couldn't, obviously, but I think people, because I've talked to people who are like trying to find some sales or whatever, they're like, oh, I don't know, that's what they really should have. Exaggerate a lot, that's $1,400 could go a long way, could not, that's heaven, but that's everywhere else.
Everywhere else,
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because I'm so scared of that.
How you work, you haven't worked
It was,
out
I can imagine if he has a huge dog, like 2 big dogs.
When I have a dog, I used to have a bunch of parrots, and everybody, and now I'm getting it.
And they're all service dogs, right?
And he said was 2 chihuahuas, and we are doing that. Just very long, but 2 chihuahuas, very aggressive. They demolished the whole house.
I just paid And you can also do, you can say, I got a double, right, first class security and double
Okay, I like that. Because free and not is different than enforcement.
That case, because I think it's that luckily the kids that rely on they can't really do it.
Get one of those mini ones. I would like it.
That's how you say it.
You guys are gonna see my journal.
Where is this
I'm
place?
getting it at the end, November.
Bring it in here.
It's my story. Say that no. You gotta say, you can't deny my rights. And you gotta say, you can't deny my rights.
You can't ask for
So, when it comes to never put this together again. So, I don't want to hang my last. So, my daughter's very, he's a very good heart, good guy. He's a good guy. So, my daughter insists, 1400, 1400. Okay, let's go. Let's do it. My daughter.
That's what I have.
What is it now?
But they want to.
823.
I'm gonna cat. And in my mind, I have cats. Oh yeah, I have a key. I like kids. I like playing with kids. Mine's an indoor cat. So this is my parrot. Oh, with my daughter. And this is my daughter. What's the baby's name? Choco. Choco. I mean, I can turn it on. Somebody's dog.
But like I said,
They're cute. I would like to have them. I like them at first.
Apply their.
Yes, we found them.
I finished that class. Sorry.
That's okay. No.
Either they have a and they have
What I think they're
Good size of bedroom, good size of
Okay, guys, it's gonna take us 15.
When they come in. So. So they look around and they find anything really wrong.
On page 150, I'd like you to put a bracket around lines 1 through 40.
1 to 40.
No stop, there is one, but not yet. In the middle of the page, it talks about special exemptions under the Act. One of them is religious organization and the other is private clubs. An example of the religious, you have a Methodist church who builds a nursing home for its members. A person that is Catholic comes along and wants to come into the nursing home, and they refuse to allow her because she's not a member of the church. That is not discrimination. Now, if she wants to become a Methodist and join our church, then we can talk. But it's not discriminatory. You know, you would say, well, that's racial. I mean, religious. No. They're not saying, we won't let you in because you're Catholic. If they said that, that would be discriminatory. But they said, you're not a member of our church, therefore, it's for our members. Private club. You've got the Irish American Club has 10 log cabins up in the Georgia mountains that they rent out to their members for vacations and whatever. A non-member of the club comes along and wants to be able to rent one of the units. They can refuse to allow them to rent, no matter who they are, because they're not a member of the club.
Those are the.
So then, yeah.
So would they be in trouble if the guy says, well, then I want to be a member?
Does he meet the qualifications to be a member? I would like you on line 26 to highlight the word steering. I'm on 150. I'm on line 26. It's right at the end of the line in heavy black letters. It says steering. Right below it, you will see blockbusting. And then there's one more called redlining on line 31. That should also be highlighted. Blockbusting should have a star.
Which one? The next one?
Can you say it again, please? Can you repeat that again?
Why?
The
What
star.
is the first thing?
Ah, blockbuster.
Now, the first two are really licensing, real estate licensing violations. Redlining is more from a lender's perspective or an insurance company. They used to literally have red lines around a map, and because of who lived within that area, the sales associates or mortgage brokers knows that they can't make loans or sell insurance policies in those communities. How about, tell me if this is a violation. I was doing some work for a mortgage company, and one of the big investors that buy the mortgages they create here sent out a memorandum to them, as well as some of the other banks that they buy mortgages from, that they would purchase no mortgage for properties below 595.
No, because it's not a geographic location that they're delineating.
Now, if you think about it for a minute, 595 is an interesting barrier. Florida changes greatly when you get beyond 595 heads up.
Well, you're talking about a location, not a price.
Right. So they would not purchase a mortgage or note from the lenders for any properties located south of 595. Now, that sounds like it's what?
Redlining.
Yeah, discriminating against?
Lower.
No, not necessarily lower income.
Socially, race.
Think about the demographics of that part of Florida compared. All right, so we'll just leave it at that.
So,
Now,
how that would be called?
we don't know if they violated the law yet. The reason that they did that is they had documentation, research that they had done, and everything they purchased beyond south of 595 had a foreclosure rate that was 50% of the rest of their investments. Now, as an investor, I'm not going to keep buying stuff where 50% of the time I'm going to lose my principal. That was the reasoning.
But it's not more
Let's
a
assume
business.
that they were telling the truth. Well, they had to document it, which they did.
So it's a business.
So that was a business decision, not because of who lived there. If it had been because of who lived there, then we got redlining situation. The two that really mean more to us is that steering and blockbuster. One is a violation when you're working with a landlord, a tenant or a buyer. And the other one is if you're working with a seller or landlord. Blockbusting is when you're taking listings. I have a great way to get listings. I'm going to move an Irish family in down the street and wait for to start. And then I'm going to go knock on their door and say, you know who's just moved into the community. You know what happens to the community when Irish people move in. First it's the wild parties, then it's the pubs, and then it's the fighting, and then it's the heavy drinking. You better let me list your house and sell it before values start going down.
Wow.
Worked like a charm, because we had a community full of bigots. Now, up north it worked much better, because we know up north, in the northeast corridor, you've got certain parts of town, New York's a perfect example of it, where it's typically, well, it's not so much today, but my wife talked about growing up. This was one group and this was another group. Whether they got along or didn't get along, we kind of know that if you're in this area, this is who you'll be dealing with. So it made it very easy to infiltrate the place. That's blockbuster. That doesn't concern me too much with you guys. The one I'm concerned about is steering. Steering means I'm directing them towards or away from anything on that protected list.
How do you let your buyer know if it's a bad neighborhood without, you know, breaking the law?
The crime report.
If they, well, most people are gonna ask about the community.
Safety.
And, you know, the chances are pretty good that they're gonna ask no matter what. Now, in the schools. Well, schools is easy. I give them the schools for that area, because most of the MLS sheets indicate what schools they're in. Obviously, I can go online and find out what the current school boundaries are. We know that can change every year, but we know we do have quick resources to get answers to those questions. They need to be within walking distance of the synagogue.
So what, is that a question?
Well, I'm getting to the question, just trying to figure out which one I'm gonna ask. My question is this:
Whichever
can you
one's
show
on-
them property on that basis?
Yes.
Yes.
No? Yeah. I think so, because it's one of their requirements.
Yeah, I mean, they wanna be
Yeah.
close to the water, that's for sure. What's wrong with that?
Might be in the reference.
They can wanna be walking distance from their job, you can't tell them.
I would say if they tell you so,
Yeah, I wanna tell you.
more than you,
You don't decide, they have to come in.
that's the direction.
They're requesting it,
Yes.
it's not that the realtor is saying you should go through
Exactly.
it.
It's it's from their partner, from our.
Remember I said I was worried about steering?
Yeah.
Now I'm having palpitations.
But if that is what they want, you are not supposed to.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry, sir, but federal law and office policy does not allow me to show property or give out information on the basis of, unless I'd like to lose my license. You could go look for anything you want to, but I got a federal law that says I can't base it on a list.
So being close to their church is impossible?
Can you explain that again? Why would that be wrong?
It's religion.
Religion.
The instructions were based upon religion. Religion is on the list.
Especially okay. So, customer cannot say to you, I wanna purchase a place.
Yes, they can. They can say that they want a place within walking distance of a synagogue.
Okay.
Could you not open up a map and say, here's your point? And if you can walk 5 miles, this is where it takes a 5-mile walk, can you not say that?
Nope.
So you cannot direct.
Nope. What I would recommend is they go speak to the people at the synagogue and find out what communities their parishioners typically go to
So they
or
would have to
live.
specify the community.
And then they come back with a list of Shady Brook, Running Water, Snowy Cliffs, 3 subdivisions. And they say, we want to see property in those 3 subdivisions. I'm in business. Because that ain't on the list. Subdivision is on the list, but religion is.
Can they give you like a special area where they wanna live?
Yeah,
Like
like, give me an example of what you
from
mean.
the-
I'm gonna see. Give me an example of what you mean.
Like, I want to find a home between Clintmoor and Glades.
Okay, cool.
That's fine.
Really?
What about east and west?
More on the west.
Okay.
So,
So how far west?
West of the military.
That's allowable.
But see, that location is not on the list.
So, but what do you tell them?
What do I tell them? I'm sorry, sir, I'm sorry, ma'am, but federal law and office policy does not allow me to show out property or give out information on the basis of. And then I have to show them how to get that information. Are you ready for this? Here's the information, right there. Tells them everything they need to know. It's a county document with demographics.
You don't wanna lose them.
Are you ready? I can't pick that up, hand it to them.
They need to get
But I can tell them it's there.
Please, can you get it? Because my text that you get it.
You can tell them what website to go to, but you couldn't go there for them.
Oh my God.
It's not tricky.
I mean, it is, the way you do things, you know? I mean,
If they
you make people laugh.
And what happens if they
But
say that
if you
we
give
cannot
them-
get this
you have to look at
Can
it.
you help us to do
It's
it?
like not being polite, you know what I mean?
Well, that's why I have to explain to them that this is not the way I operate. I have a federal law called the Civil Rights Act of 1968, Fair Housing Act, that says I'm not allowed to show property or give out information on the basis of, and you better learn that list. And add in the service people. Thing, whatever.
So if the customer asks you that they want to buy a home close to the synagogue, could you respond by telling them, can you just give me specific street locations, north, south, to bypass?
That's why I'd send them back to the synagogue. Because they would tell them in a big hurry.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure they've been asked that question a zillion times.
You have to be in walking distance. Be able to walk to the synagogue.
It's interesting, growing up was so much different than living here. And, you know, I've learned a lot about, you know, the characteristics of a group, whether it be religion or whatever. But I had a gal one Saturday, it was either Friday afternoon or Saturday, she handed me a $1 bill. I said, what's this for? Well, when I come tomorrow, I'd like to get a soda for lunch and one in the afternoon. And she says, I can't touch money. So she gave me the $1 bill, and at lunch, I put the $1 bill in, handed her a Coke. She said, you know, you have to hang on. So I hung on to the 50 cents until she got her Coke in the afternoon. That's part of the religion.
Yeah.
Whatever level she's on, that you can't touch money. How did I get it? Well, she couldn't touch money on, I think, I remember what, I think it was Saturday. I think it's
No,
Saturday.
it's Friday night, when the sun goes down, you cannot do anything until Sunday.
Well,
From sunset on
where I
Friday.
grew up in Virginia, they had what they call the old blue laws. I remember, just before I moved down here, well, actually, when I first came back to college, and I bought a house for my uncle, $13,000.
13,000, that's cheap.
Well, this was 1970.
Here?
Here?
The house was here? Or
No.
Oh, back where you're living?
Here would have been 10,000.
10,000.
No, I forgot what I was going to tell you. Oh, I was standing in line at the grocery store and I had salt and pepper shaker. The guy in front of me had a carton of cigarettes. She couldn't sell me the salt and pepper shaker because it would have something to do with work.
Kosher.
And the Sabbath was supposed to be, you didn't work, you didn't do anything. That was Presbyterian. Now I'm Catholic, so transformation, I guess.
I'm sorry, Mr. Deck, can you tell me, what was the scenario about the Coke and the dollar and the 50 cents?
Because in a certain sect of the Jewish faith,
Orthodox.
on Orthodox, thank you, on Saturday, there's certain things they can't do because it's a holy day. One of it is touch money. So that's why she gave me the money. She gave it to me on Friday. Now I'm thinking she gave it to me on Friday before she left. And she said, can you hold this for me? You know, and not knowing and being familiar with it was like, then she explained the reason for That's why I said to you earlier on, if you ever get a chance to go to a course that talks about the different characteristics of different types of people, because we live in a society here that is, I mean, look at the room, it's so diverse. I tell you what, the first class I ever taught had two basic categories of people. WASP, Virginia.
The first class?
Yeah, not back in 1978. My first class was basically those two groups. WASP. You don't know what a WASP is? White, American.
Why not American? Yeah, this is what I thought.
That's why growing up in New York,
Yeah. That's why me growing up, we didn't. I mean, there may have been different religions, but everybody basically, you know, thought the same way. And all had the same accent. So, you know, I realize that I don't have a southern accent.
Yes, you do.
Because I am in the South.
No, you have. You do. You have.
Not, huh?
You have.
I do?
Yes,
Yeah, but I have a little bit. But you spend 40 years with the people from New York who still sound like they live in New York.
Say yes, ma'am.
It was funny when I went to college, I had classmates that were, most of them I was friends with were from New York and New Jersey. So I hung around with them all the time. And if you ever heard a Southern accent where half of it is Southern and the other half is New York, I would say 24, and the 20 would sound like I was from Virginia, and the 4 would sound like I was from New York. But to me, it's important that I understand that. Just like, for example, Middle East, you do not address the wife until the husband introduces them.
And selling to the Chinese is different.
With some of the Orientals, you're in a business meeting and you show the heel of your shoe, that's considered to be an insult. Now, that's not me. To be able to take a course where you would learn about things like that, to me, would be very valuable. Because I remember I had a listing not long ago, and the potential buyers drive up. There's like 4 kids and a husband and wife, and the agent. And they came up to the door and they stopped. Didn't knock or anything. Were they Asian?
What was it?
Asian.
Asian, yeah.
And so I open the door and I see that the agent has what looks like a compass on a phone.
Oh, the north.
Because if the door or front door isn't facing west, they won't buy it.
Oh my. He sold them to a lot of Asians, We know all the superstitions. That's one of them.
But again, you can lose fire over that because you weren't aware of it. And, you know, sometimes it's not about discrimination, it's about understanding the culture.
Get the contractor here right away.
Can I tell you why?
Now, let me ask you this question. If I ask you to show me property in an Irish community, does that pose a problem?
Yeah. Nope.
You're not directing me there. I'm telling you that's where I want to live.
Oh, that's no problem.
Yeah, it's the same as race.
No.
No, Irish is not race. It's national origin.
Yeah. You can't.
You can't. I guess you can't.
Give me a directions, address.
National street. Or name of a subdivision.
Wait a minute. Your buyer is telling you they want to live in an Irish community. They have nothing against anybody else. They just want to be with some people of their same culture.
So you
What's
say,
wrong with that?
what would that national origin?
What's the difference in that?
You would be steering them.
What's that?
I'm sorry, sir, I'm am, but federal law.
Yeah, same thing.
Not allowed me to
Same
show
thing.
property, you don't give out their information on the basis of.
National origin.
Religion, national origin, same thing.
You need to learn that list. Not to pass the test. To save your butt. Now, you'll notice that every time we get into issues and they involve federal law, what do I always do before I talk about it? I set up the fact that what? This is federal law, or this is state law. I want them to understand that everybody they deal with is playing under the same rules. Whether it's rules from the state level or whether it's rules from a federal level. They need to know that. Because you know as well as I do, there are agents out there, whatever you tell them you want, they're going to do it. Doesn't matter whether it's evil. And I think sometimes they may have forgotten. And their logic is what? I'm not doing anything wrong. They asked me to show them an Irish community. What's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with it other than Mom says I can't do it. Tell me where you want to live. As far as community, as far as streets, all those things aren't on the list. I can deal with all those. On the listing agreement, in the first paragraph of the listing agreement, the seller is acknowledging that we're not allowed to discriminate on the basis of.
Race, color,
All right, enough of this folks. The next part of this talks about the enforcement and how they go about it. I don't have really a whole lot to say there. Where I'd like to go now, if we can, is to page 154. Americans with Disabilities Act, 1990. Lines 1 through 30. Yeah. Bracket, yes. No star. In the paragraph where it talks about new construction and renovation, if you have someone who comes along, wants to rent out your home, or property you own, and they're handicapped, so they need to be able to put in a ramp to get in the front door. The question is, do I have to allow them to put that ramp in?
Yes.
Yes.
Depends.
If it's a private home.
No, it depends on what it says in that paragraph. Public accommodations and commercial facilities must be newly constructed if readily achievable to meet accessibility standards. Criteria for determining whether a public accommodation or a commercial facility can be made accessible is set forth in the Act. If readily achievable. That means that you don't do a lot of damage to the house and you don't spend too much money. Then it's readily achievable. But in a residential situation, they have to put it back to the way it was when they lived it.
But I have a question. The ramp is only one obstacle. The other thing.
I just used that as an example.
Okay, well.
So other things could come into
Right,
play.
yeah.
And so if it's like 10 things you gotta do to make it feasible, it's not. Because then I'm doing so much, it's like, well, it's a 2-story, so he wants to put a chairlift up. Well, the house wasn't built with the proper framing in the wall for chairlift. So the odds are, it's gonna cost a lot of money and have to pull the wall out and everything and reinforce it in order to put that in. So it's not readily achievable. Okay, bottom page.
I'm sorry, Mr. Dell, but, from 150 after the red lining, you're not going to highlight anything else for that?
Yep. At the bottom of the page, I don't want you to read the note. It says Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act. What does this require?
Full disclosure?
Of
The land sale in the state.
the sale of
The land.
the interstate land. That's why they call it the. In other words, when the motorhomes used to show up north to sell you Florida swampland. I remember one time, my parents actually went and looked at it. They came in with a big, like a Winnebago type thing. And, you know, they had all the displays out and everything. They even offered trips to Florida. But they would put you, you had to pay for your own way, but they would put you up for 3 nights and 2 days, or 2 days and 3 nights or something. Is this act designed to keep the consumer from buying worthless swampland?
Yes.
No, it's to make sure you know you're buying worthless swampland.
Okay.
Look at the notes. They have to disclose. There's that report and everything they talk about that. They have to disclose what as is.
So it's up to you if you make.
So you could literally, you know, they tell you, you may not have access for 10 or 20 years. Well, they can't guarantee if you'll ever have access. And then you go ahead and choose to purchase it. Because in the past, they didn't bother telling you anything.
Let me ask you something. Is any problem when you buy a property close to the train rails? I mean, is.
Well, as long as it doesn't derail, there's nothing physically wrong. But the noise,
It's an inconvenience.
yeah. But it depends on where the house is. If the house is next to the railroad, but a mile away from any cross street,
Exactly.
you're not going to have the whistle.
What about if the house is built against the noise? It has high impact windows
Yeah.
and all that.
That's in the suburbs.
Well, let me ask you a question. When you put it up for sale, did somebody want to buy it?
I don't know, that is, I don't know.
Then I don't know the answer to your question.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't know if that is for resale value, if that is a problem.
If you can prove that they can't hear the train, yeah. Although it'd be cold in Christmas time. Because you have your own train set.
What about
You just want to plant Christmas trees out along the train track.
Hey, what
And then
about-
reroute it during Christmas.
What about power lines?
Power lines? Well, they kind of gave up on the fact that, you know, they're going to turn you into babbling fools. That, you know, there was a danger from
And is that true? Is that proof? That
Apparently not.
Apparently not.
Because I know that, you know, they were concerned because there were a lot of schools that were in that kind of locations. And you know, the studies, last time I haven't heard anything about it. You don't hear anything about it.
Okay.
There isn't anything bad going on. Because if something was bad going on or they found new research, it would be in the news about that fast. If you'd like more information about that, you might want to contact FDNL. Their number is,
Yes.
their website is, because that's what I would say to a buyer.
Yeah.
I would not give them my personal opinion like I did with you.
Okay.
You're not allowed to have a personal opinion. unless you got the facts to back it up.
Oh, I have another question. Is that true that if your house is close to the power lines or is in the back of your house, you will have to pay if they want to go underground with the electricity?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Again, you may want to contact them.
You
You understand what I'm doing here?
Yeah, that's good.
Exactly what you would do.
Good.
It's okay to be stupid, as long as you don't say anything. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with you not knowing.
Yeah.
What I need to do is have my little black book. I remember of an agent that had a little black book. You needed something at the county, at the courthouse, she'd whip out her book. She had everybody's name there that had anything to do with something like deal with real estate.
Wow. She was prepared.
All right, to show you how hard she worked at, when, I've forgotten which agency it was, but someone there that she'd worked a lot with was retiring. He called her up to let her know that he was retiring and that if she needed any information, to call Betty. He literally called her up to tell her that he was retiring and here's the person that was taking his place. Because this business is about who you know.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not working very hard on increasing the number of those people are. How many of you got your list?
Yeah.
How many of you got more than 100 people on it? If you ain't got more than 100 people on it, you haven't done shit. I'm not impressed. Then you better get out more and start talking to strangers. Because people are your money. So if you're making no effort to find people, you have no money. You still licensed in Jersey?
New York.
New York? You still licensed there?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you told all your realtor
A lot of
friends?
them.
Oh, how many?
A lot.
How many? The answer should have been what?
It's over 100.
Oh, I don't care how many it is.
All of them.
The more the better. Are you ready for this? I had an agent who was talking, that he had to call up north for something, and to a real estate company. Because they would want to do a referral. Somehow this company's name came up. And two of the group, they had groups with team leaders. The two of the groups, the two team leaders took the phone call. I'm not sure why they were both on. And he got to talking to him and said, listen, why don't we work up a referral agreement? And they said, are you kidding me? They said, we're constantly getting people who are moving to Florida and we don't know what to do. He said, I'll take care of it for you. Now, you would have thought that those people would have enough sense to make contacts down here. I don't wait for real estate agents to make sense. That's why people make more money than others. Now see, that's a brand new guy. And what kind of hookup did he just make? I guarantee that hookup's worth $20,000 or $30,000 a year.
So they
Because
would
the
get a
area that they're
referral fee?
coming from is one of the big areas that people move to Florida from.
So they would
in the
get a
States.
referral fee?
Yeah, 25%.
Yeah, that's what we were talking at the beginning.
You know what, if you're sending me buyers, or even sellers, because you know someone here that's looking to, that you worked with them up north and now they're living here and they need a broker here, I'll pay you 25% all day long. You handed me a qualified buyer or seller, I'll pay you 25% all day. Checks in the mail. Well, actually, I won't pay you. Under this Interstate Land Sales Full Disclosure Act, I want you to highlight at the middle of line 36, where it says Interstate Land Sales Act is administered by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. That statement has a start.
Oh, yeah.
I'm at the bottom of 154. When they talk about the Interstate Land Sales Act being administered by Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. On page 155, we head into another category called the Florida Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. Does this act, which is a state act, apply to all rentals?
Rental dwelling units.
Residential.
Yeah, the first word is what? Yeah, it says residential, so I guess it would deal with residential. Now, when it comes to rentals, you're typically looking at first, last, and 1 month security. Advance rents and security deposits within the state of Florida have to be held in a certain way by the landlord. I'd like for you to put a bracket around lines 11, where it says Florida Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, through line 36. Take a minute to read through it. Looking at those three, what's the key word? No.
Landlord.
Landlord, no. No.
Interest.
No. No.
Tenant.
No.
Rent.
No.
Condition?
No.
What is it, boss?
No.
Obligation.
No.
Rent, tenant, security.
No.
The guarantee,
No.
the
One word.
rental,
Separate? One word.
No.
protect the rental.
No.
Is this a deposit?
Non-interest?
I said it's a word, not a number.
Residential.
No.
Is it in the paragraph?
What's the question?
No.
Money?
What's the key word in this group of these three statements?
Deposits.
No.
The act?
No.
Tenant.
No.
No.
Money.
Rental?
Separate. No.
Bank account.
No.
Security deposit.
Florida. I think you said every word on the page except for Florida.
Florida, right? We know Florida.
Yeah, we do, yeah, right.
That's a good question. Teaching us about Florida, aren't you?
This is about
Now, they have three options. They can put it in a non-interest-bearing account, just let it sit there. Or they can put it in an interest-bearing account and pay the tenant a certain portion of that money. Or they can post a bond and pay 5% interest, and they can actually use the money. Now, if you think about it today,
5% is great.
if I was going to take that money and invest it, probably will wind up owing them, and then I got to give them how much? 75%? I'm looking at making, what, 1 or 2 pennies on each one of them. And obviously, and then the accounting work I gotta do, because I've got 8 units to keep all those units straight. So I don't need another headache, which is the interest that isn't worth my effort. Wouldn't pay 1 month's worth of service fees.
Not now, but maybe years ago.
Yeah.
So what?
How do we know which type of account our landlord is using? Is that disclosure in the lease
Turn
agreement?
page.
In the lease agreement,
The paragraph at the top of the page. What's you read better if you're not talking.
Hold on, I'm reading.
You are reading better if you're not talking.
I never received that letter.
It's that in the lease. It's probably in the lease.
I'm gonna ask tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
Don't waste your time. Because it has to be 5 or more units before that's applicable. That's why you never get the notice. Because I own a condo, or I own a couple condos, and I rent them out.
So if you own 5 or more units,
Then you have to comply with this.
I mean, I do.
In other words, that is for the complexes.
Well, I live in a complex.
That one right there.
So like if I own 6 homes, does that fall under that?
Yes.
Okay, I live in a complex with like 200.
How many do they own?
So do they have to give me a letter? Do they have to notify me?
But not, they
Is it owned by the
Yeah,
council?
it was probably, you were notified in the original lease document.
Oh, okay, I didn't.
Because the lease documents that, when you go into one of these, rental communities, you basically turn them over. They have a lease that's 8 miles long. Our lease is 6 pages.
yeah.
And all we can do is fill in the blanks on them. So it's a different ballgame when you go in there. Now, my landlord lives in Michigan. I've got a security check here, and part of the second month's rent after paying tuition. The security deposit is supposed to stay where?
In the same.
In Florida.
Yeah.
The rest of it, which was the rest of the second month's rent, I can send to them. What about this, say, $1,000 security deposit?
Florida?
Where's the question?
Florida Bank.
Where's the question?
But he's in Michigan,
Yeah.
and he wants to have access to the money.
Yeah, but he can touch the money.
Unless he does the,
That is not.
post the bond.
And let me see if I can help you along with the right answer. He banks at Bank of America in Michigan.
He's in trouble.
So what does he do? He goes to his local branch, he opens up an account. He then gives me the account number, and I do what? I make his first deposit. first deposit is the security deposit. And the rest of that rent wasn't used to pay commission. As long as the financial institution has either a branch or an affiliate company. There are a lot of the credit unions now that, you know, you can go into credit unions in other parts of the state or other parts of the country and do whatever business you need to do. I'm with IBM, and I know that they have, I'm not sure how many, but they do have others. Okay, let me do one more thing here, and I think we can wrap it up. On page 156, where we were, there's a section starting with line 9 that says broker property management. Put a bracket around 9 to 23. Once you do that, there's a sentence I want you to highlight. If you go to line 13, about halfway across, the sentence starts out, the deposits and advance rent are trust funds, and as such must be deposited into the broker's escrow account by the end of the 3rd business day after receipt of trust funds. Now, we talked about the fact that you could have a trust fund for sales and a trust fund for leases. What you just read will help get you 1 point on the test. It will have nothing to do with what you do day in and day out. We do not have an escrow account here for rentals. So we handle rentals different than most companies. And on that wonderful note,
Thank you.
good night. Again, remember the door is supposed to be closed when you leave, unless you're in the bar.
I'm very interested in understanding how the 25% is paying all the wrong work.
I'll give you a quick example. Listen and I'll tell you. You can hook up with a New York broker. An agent in New York. Okay? There's a form that you fill out where they agree to refer buyer fees. In exchange, whatever commission you make, you'll give them a 25% referral. You give them to me and you pay.
Yeah, free.
I'm going to go